What if a Western forced America to face a truth it wasn't ready to hear? What if Hollywood, at the height of its power, quietly buried parts of that truth just to survive? In 1960, at a time when American cinema still tiptoed around race, Sergeant Rutledge appeared, not loudly, not defiantly, but dangerously. On the surface, it looked like a traditional courtroom Western. A soldier on trial. A question of honor. But beneath that familiar frame was something far more unsettling. A black cavalry sergeant accused of raping and killing a white woman. And here's the question audiences weren't encouraged to ask, but couldn't avoid once the film began. Can justice exist when guilt has already been decided by skin color? Hollywood didn't want this story spoken too clearly. Studios warned viewers not to reveal the ending. Some theaters refused entry during the final minutes. But the most powerful secret wasn't the verdict. It was what the audience was never allowed to see at all. Sergeant Rutledge opens without gunfire or heroics. Instead, it begins in a military courtroom, heavy with silence and judgment. A black man stands alone before a system that seems to have already reached its conclusion. There is no clear villain, no comforting moral certainty, only suspicion, glances, and an unspoken verdict hanging in the air. Released in 1960 and directed by John Ford, the film unfolds through fractured testimony rather than linear action. Witnesses pull the story backward in time, each perspective reshaping what we think we know. Truth is never handed to us whole. We're forced to assemble it ourselves, just like the jury on screen. And that raises an uncomfortable question. When evidence conflicts with prejudice, which do we believe? At the center is Sergeant Braxton Rutledge, played by Woody Strode, a black soldier accused of crimes that, in 19th century America, required no proof to secure conviction. His disappearance after the crime is instantly read as guilt. His spotless record means nothing. No one asks why. No one waits for facts. Fear fills in the blanks. The town doesn't gather for justice. It gathers for spectacle. They arrive early, boots scraping dust from the street, voices low but eager. This is entertainment disguised as duty, judgment disguised as order. In this town, guilt is not proven, it is assumed. Especially when the accused looks like Sergeant Braxton Rutledge. He stands alone, tall and unmoving, a black cavalry sergeant accused of crimes so explosive they seem to demand a verdict before the trial even begins. Murder. Rape. Betrayal of the uniform. The crowd doesn't want answers. It wants closure. And closure, to them, looks like a rope tightened quickly so no one has to think too hard about what they're doing. Only two figures dare to resist the momentum of condemnation. Lieutenant Tom Cantrell, the young defense attorney, is not a traditional hero. He doesn't thunder into the courtroom. He doesn't radiate confidence. He hesitates. He second-guesses himself. He understands, perhaps too clearly, the cost of standing against a room that has already decided the truth. Cantrell is cautious, isolated, and quietly defiant. He knows that defending Rutledge will cost him socially, professionally, maybe even physically. Still, he does it, not because he's brave by nature, but because something in him refuses to let a man be destroyed without being heard. And then there is Mary Beecher, a white civilian woman, a witness no one expected to matter. Her presence alone destabilizes everything the prosecution assumes to be true. She doesn't fit the story they've prepared. She doesn't perform fear the way they expect. Her testimony doesn't confirm their worst instincts, it complicates them. In a town addicted to certainty, complication is dangerous. As fragments of memory align, the story begins to turn, not through violence, not through courtroom theatrics, but through recognition. Small details surface. Timelines fracture. Assumptions crumble. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in, uncomfortable and unwelcome. Rutledge is innocent. Yet the film refuses triumph. There is no swelling music of victory, no cathartic release. His exoneration feels fragile, almost accidental, like a glass placed too close to the edge of the table. One wrong word, one missing witness, one less determined lawyer, and the outcome would have been very different. Justice doesn't roar here. It whispers. And even then, it almost isn't heard. Without one lawyer willing to stand alone, justice would have failed completely. So the film leaves us with another question, one that lingers long after the final frame fades. If innocence depends on rare courage, how often does justice truly win? What made Sergeant Rutledge controversial wasn't just its subject, it was its timing. Hollywood in 1960 rarely centered black characters. It almost never positioned them as moral anchors within a white society's failure. When black characters appeared, they were often supporting figures, symbols, or stereotypes, rarely the emotional core of the story. John Ford didn't announce a revolution. He didn't preach. He simply placed a black man at the center of an American myth and let the system around him reveal its flaws. Ford avoids speeches or slogans. Racism doesn't announce itself loudly in the film. It reveals itself through silence, through procedure, through the eagerness to condemn, through the way questions are asked or not asked, through the speed with which the town decides what kind of man Rutledge must be. That subtlety made audiences uncomfortable. People came expecting a familiar John Ford Western, wide landscapes, clear heroes, moral certainty. Instead, they were asked to sit with doubt, to confront the possibility that the law itself could be bent by prejudice. The film didn't perform well at the box office. It was too heavy, too confrontational, too real. But legacy isn't measured in ticket sales. Over time, Sergeant Rutledge gained recognition as a quiet milestone, one of the earliest mainstream films to place a black soldier at the heart of American mythmaking, not as a symbol, but as a mirror. A mirror reflecting what the country preferred not to see, that courage can exist alongside injustice, and loyalty can still be repaid with suspicion. Even the marketing hinted at danger. Warner Brothers leaned into secrecy, warning audiences not to reveal the ending. Westerns didn't need twist protection, but this one did. Because the truth it revealed wasn't just about the plot. It was about America. About who is believed. About who is protected. About how easily fear can disguise itself as law. Behind the scenes, the risks were even greater. Casting Woody Strode was a gamble studios resisted. He wasn't a safe star. He wasn't easily marketable. He didn't fit the polished image Hollywood preferred. But Ford refused compromise. He didn't want softness. He didn't want reassurance. He needed strength, not symbolism. Rutledge had to look unbreakable, or the injustice wouldn't land. If the man looked weak, the audience could rationalize his suffering. Strode's physical presence denied them that comfort. Censorship hovered over every frame. The production code still ruled Hollywood, forbidding explicit depictions of interracial intimacy, sexual violence, or direct racial confrontation. As a result, the film is filled with absences. Crimes are described, not shown. Relationships are implied, not visualized. Moments dissolve into silence where other films might linger. Those silences speak loudly. They force the audience to imagine what cannot be shown. They hint at realities too volatile to depict directly. The restraint isn't artistic timidity, it's survival. And that leads to perhaps the most haunting question of all. What truths were softened or erased, simply because America wasn't ready? There are no confirmed deleted scenes. No recovered footage. Only gaps. Strategic silences. Emotional ellipses that suggest something dangerous once lived there. Sergeant Rutledge feels like a story that stops mid-sentence, not from lack of courage, but from necessity. That incompleteness may be its greatest power. It doesn't tell us everything. It can't. Instead, it invites us to notice what's missing, and to ask why. It trusts the audience to read between the lines, to feel the weight of what remains unspoken. The cast's later lives add another layer of quiet poignancy. Woody Strode carried this role as a defining moment of dignity in a career that often denied him such complexity. Jeffrey Hunter's life and career ended too soon, his promise cut short. Others faded into history, their names no longer immediately recognized. Yet their work remains, a frozen moment when Hollywood dared to pause and ask questions instead of offering escape. And maybe that's why Sergeant Rutledge still matters. Because it doesn't offer easy comfort. It doesn't pretend justice is automatic or inevitable. It reminds us that systems are only as fair as the people willing to challenge them. That silence can be as damaging as cruelty. That doing the right thing often means standing alone, uncertain, and afraid. It asks something timeless. If justice bends to prejudice, What does that say about the society judging the case? And if this is one story that barely survived being told, how many others were never allowed to exist at all? Stories buried before the cameras rolled. Voices softened before they could speak. Truths deemed too dangerous for their moment. If you want to keep exploring the films that history tried to silence, the stories cut short because they arrived too early, then stay with us. Some truths don't fade. They wait. And when we're finally ready to listen, they speak louder than ever.